Hello again. We're going to keep going on some of these terms and definitions as the rain picks up. It's a rather lovely little sound. Rather liking that. Nice for some sort of intellectual pursuit. Got two more words here in the A's, and from what I can tell, from what I'm again, it's this book here, World of Ideas. And from as I'm kind of previewing some stuff, I think I can knock out a couple of the ones that I want in the B section at one time as well. So the next couple things should go pretty smoothly. Again, right now I'm just focusing on terms. I haven't gotten into any of the people yet. And there's people scattered throughout here, and there's probably a few of them I might try and definitely nail in, like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, um, something like that. Maybe put up something about Plato's allegory of the cave, which would actually kind of almost look like, if you think about The Matrix, the movie The Matrix, you can probably be able to pretty much understand the allegory of the cave to some extent. Uh, so there's that. So the what we're going to do today with finishing up the A's is almost sort of a yin yang kind of thing. We have animism and atomism. So one's a little bit more sort of uh, technically sort of a little bit more spiritual bent. The other one kind of deals, again, atomism, a little bit more with sciencey stuff. So, animism is the belief that all things are inhabited by a soul or spirit. So if you watch anything like any anime or read any manga or anything, and they're showing a lot of the stuff with Shintoism, this would have a lot of that involved. So if you're familiar or see anything with a lot of different indigenous things around the world, they'll have that going on with it in some aspect or another. There seems to be a sort of a common theme about that. It can take a number of forms, including belief in a, quote, world soul pervading all creation, the attribution of consciousness to natural phenomena such as wind and rain, and the assigning of human characteristics to animals and objects, and the belief that the soul is the animating force or vital principle in animal and plant life. So basically, that's just a fancy way of saying everything has some sort of consciousness, some sort of soul, some sort of animating thing that makes it almost like a being. So while human consciousness is kind of human consciousness, that doesn't mean that now other things don't have that as well. So, as the planet itself has a consciousness. Every sort of ecosystem, or again, if you watch even like Princess Mononoke or something like that, there's spirits of the forest. Different rocks, different trees, different places that are kind of a little bit more almost sort of holy, more powerful than other ones, might have this animating spirit to it too. And some beliefs have a greater or lesser degree of that. It might be only kind of things that have a kind of like a real kind of wow kind of feeling to it. Obviously, have some sort of spirit. Versus sort of not versus, but maybe some things have everything does in the natural world. It's just there's different degrees of that. So the difference between, hey, these two oak trees look very similar, but they feel very different. One might have a maybe stronger or more, slightly more on the ball, sort of humany consciousness than maybe the other one might. And it's all sort of linked in with that. Pre-literate societies are typically infused with animistic beliefs. Pre-literate, in other words, they don't have reading or writing the way we in 20th, 21st century West would consider reading and writing. They start giving examples. Sub-Saharan African religions include the Igbo earth goddess Allah, who inhabits the earth and influences both agricultural and human fecundity. Fecundity is like fertility, basically. And they give some other examples here. They also cite, there's different North American native beliefs. Obviously, this is, a little bit a 20-year-old book. It would be considered indigenous now. Animistic elements are found throughout the world's cultures, however. The personification of thunder, fire, sun, and so on in the Greco Roman pantheon were animistic in origin. The ancient animistic beliefs often survive in modern religious practice. They give the instance in India of the quote house spirit is revered by many Hindu and Buddhist households. So the term animism is from a Latin anima, which is soul, from the Greek for breath. It was coined by English anthropologist Edward B. Tyler in Primitive Culture in 1871. They sought to explain the origin and evolution of religious beliefs in terms of the experiential worldview of prehistoric humans, which was preserved, so he thought, in pre-literate tribal cultures. So they were looking into sort of history of religion and how religions formed, and they were using different cultures that we would consider now to be indigenous or native in the kind of older parlance as ideas of the this would have been maybe what we would have been like beforehand, and then religions as we know it, with the hierarchy of people telling you that they're the sort of conduit to whatever it might be, and then the buildings and the structure and the organization developed out of that, and how that would have become almost more like we would consider the evolution of culture now. So we go we operate generally in, again, 21st century Western cultures in a materialistic reductionary sort of mindset that's saying that, okay, everything starts as a thing here and then gets bigger and almost has a very direct exponential mathematic growth to it. Any sort of moves or changes of that usually gets somewhat thrown out or ignored, or just sort of put as oh well, that's just fringe or something like that. And this would have been tapped into that too. Especially, this is the Victorian times that we were talking about, late 19th century. They were very much trying to get rid of anything that wasn't just pure matter. So they would have been looking for these things as there would have been a strict line, what they thought of as ascension from this primitive to our better state here, is would have been the thought behind that. In Tyler's view, nature worship combined with the veneration of dead ancestors formed the basis of primitive polytheisms, many gods, which eventually developed and matured, losing their animistic features and culminating in monotheistic Judeo-Christian religion. So again, a very heavy bias, culturalist, kind of racist, saying that these other cultures that had this animistic idea involved themselves with ancestors more, and many other gods or many other spirits, whether they be actual sort of gods the way we think from, like, Greco-Roman or Nordic or Egyptian, to more sort of, okay, no, this mountain has this spirit and that's kind of who our creator thing is and we came out of that, or something like that. To them, that was more, whatever. And then what we do now in our society is the pinnacle of whatever it might be. This would also probably have the idea that Protestantism might be more evolved than Catholicism, because it has gotten rid of a lot of this sort of using saints into going into like the step between people, the saints and angels, the step between people and the higher deity, Yahweh and everything else like that. Protestantism got rid of a lot of that. Part of it was they didn't like the hierarchy from Rome and the control and power that Rome and the papacy was informing. And part of it, in terms of the actual practice, they were saying that it was too much like paganism. Because a lot of the saints were sort of borrowed from the cultures that sort of the Catholic countries sort of took. So there was, hey, And there's a Celtic goddess named Bridget, who's who's sort of the goddess of these handful of things. So now all of a sudden there's a Saint Bridget who is the patron saint of suspiciously similar things. So Protestantism is trying to get away from that, and this guy, coming, if he's English, from late 19th century, there's a lot of cultural bigotry going on with that, and that would include not just, oh, these other not English white people are bad, but also other people who don't think in the same Protestant ways we do are less evolved as well. So there's a certain product of that time that is bleeding into this as well. The theory, which saw human history in terms of progress, so again, mechanical material progress. So it's almost like you're building a Lego. You just have your a block or many blocks, and then you build them in a set pattern of ways, and that builds up as you go from that. Okay, sorry about that. I had a technical difficulty there. Um, so yeah, that weird sort of mechanistic progress. The theory which saw human terms of progress through successfully higher stages of civilization was highly influential for many years. It derived from and reinforced the faith in European superiority that inspired 19th century imperialism and missionary Christianity. So it's kind of reiterating what I was saying there. It's this really sort of self-fulfilling idea that society and civilization was less evolved in the past, because less evolved civilizations created massive stone structures with mathematical precision that wasn't rediscovered for 5,000 years later, and these societies that lasted for thousands and thousands of years with some continuity, like ancient Egypt and stuff like that. Clearly inferior beings. But also that idea of that superiority with them gave them the idea of, well, it's all right and good that we are forming an empire on the backs of all these non-white people or other white people that we happen to still think ourselves better than. It reinforced that and gave them what they thought was a scientific basis for their rape, robbing, murder, pillage, and massive hundreds of years of bigotry and racism and misogyny and everything else like that. It is now discounted by anthropologists who recognize both the complexity of tribal cultures and the presence of magical and anthropomorphic elements in all religions. So we've swung back into a little bit less of an amount of, hey, we're going to try and use both God and science to prove our racism. It's a little bit more hidden now. But that was where the terminology and the definition for animism came. It was to describe these cultures and the beliefs of those cultures in a sort of animating and conscious force and all sort of natural. And even and sometimes now things have evolved in some cultures where now even some things do have a certain spirit. If you doubt that we do that at all, think of the people who put a lot of time and effort into restoring a car and talk to it and seem to consider, their car or their house or something along those lines of having some sort of animating spirit. Even now, if we have like certain good luck charms, or if a baseball player has a certain bat that they need, or is it Michael Jordan in Space Jam in his shorts or something like that. All that stuff is examples of animism. So if you got Not necessarily, oh, well, no, this chair feels better than the other ones, but now all of a sudden, no, this place feels different than others. Or if you go to like, we got the metro parks around here, I go to park A, and that's just, I walk around. I go to park B, and that feels different, and it's almost like something's there with me or something like that. We still have that now. All right, so to kind of flip that a little bit, we have atomism. And this is going to tie in a little bit with some science too. So we've got some, these philosophical terms that you might see on tests. We got a little social studies there, a little bit of science here. The theory that all matter is composed of indivisible, so in other words, not divisible, you cannot divide them lower, irreducible, cannot be reduced, units, generally, any theory that sees complex structures or groupings as constitutive of elementary components. Holistic theories, in contrast, see the whole as more than the sum of its parts. So let me read that again. The theory that all matter is composed of indivisible, irreducible units. My cat's trying to do a haunted house thing right now. So everything is made up of littler stuff. So you look at a great big Lego building, it's all made up of smaller bits. And those bits, eventually, when you get small enough, can't be broken down anymore. And more generally, any theory that sees complex structures or groupings as constitutive elementary components, the element part of it. So, some of this is going back to more ancient thought when they thought everything was composed of, they have air, earth, fire, water as the four elements, or they have it where some of them might introduce spirit, some of them might introduce what's called the ether, which was supposed to be this sort of field or medium with which everything kind of moved, including spirit. The Chinese, traditional Chinese thought has metal, water, wood, fire, and earth. So 5 elements there as well. And now we even call the elements themselves carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, neon, all those other things we consider elements, even though they're made up of atoms, and atoms are made up of smaller particles, and those particles have other things in them too, and you get down to the strings and all that sort of stuff too. Holistic whole theories see the whole as more than some of its parts. So you can even think about holistic things as a human being. You have a heart, you have a liver, you have kidneys, you have adrenal glands, you have a thyroid, which for some reason is super massively more important than it needs to be in like every system. You got a brain, you got skin, you got bones and all that sort of thing. But that is, as a human being, you're not just those pieces. If you put, again, you get a set of Lego that you want, you put the pieces together. It's not just the pieces when you're done with it. It's, could be the Millennium Falcon, could be a castle, could be a giant 7-8 foot tall baby Yoda or something like that. At this point in time, all those pieces that are put into it have now created something larger. And as a human being, we have a system. So my heart isn't just the heart. It pumps the blood, and you need the blood to put the oxygen, moving nutrients and water, your immune system, and if something kind of goes in with the heart, then other organs start to be affected as well. We're not just machines that you take out one thing, put in something else, and replace it like you're replacing batteries in your remote control. We're a system. As a whole, we create things as well. So that's kind of contrasting that a little bit. All right, deriving from the notion that all matter is formed of their basic elements, atomism offered a solution to the problem of motion and change that vexed the ancients. How to reconcile being with becoming. In the West, the theory that matter is not continuous but is composed of innumerable tiny particles, eternal, changeless, impenetrable, identical, self-moving, and indivisible, was first clearly stated in the 5th century BCE or BCE or BC. BCE, and this is just before Common Era. We would be 2020 in the Common Era in this way, by the Greek philosopher Democritus, who also coined the term atom, meaning uncuttable. Democritus further postulated that atoms exist and interact in empty space, and that change occurs in the world through these interactions. The relative accuracy of this hypothesis is nothing less than astounding, considering that at the time it was pure conjecture and utterly counterintuitive. Plato and Aristotle condemned it as nonsense. You know, those two big names. We'll probably talk about those. Um, Coincidentally, and almost simultaneously, a very similar atomic theory was posed in the Indian Jainist philosophy. The latter Vashika school of Hinduism also taught an atomistic theory of physics. So it's not just the Greeks in the West tend to get just the credit for like everything, um, even though they also did borrow heavily from other places around them, the Etruscans and especially the Egyptians. Um, but basically, he might not have had the Democritus might not have had exactly a nucleus with a neutron and a proton, outer shell of electrons, smaller things. Of course, you might have had that, but the idea that the everything is built up of these smaller things, and the interactions of these things are the change and the stuff that we can see, laid the kind of groundwork for that. And then the Jainist philosophy had something very similar to that. In the 1st century BCE, the Roman Epicurean Lucretius, Epicurean being another form of philosophy, outlined an atomistic philosophy in his poem On the Nature of Things, which attributed the world's variety to what he saw as atoms' inherent and unpredictable liveliness. The rediscovery of this poem in the 15th century contributed to the eventual reemergence of atomic theory to challenge the prevailing Aristotelianism of the Middle Ages, which conceived of the universe as filled with substance and rejected the idea of moving particles in a void. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I also want to say, well, there is kind of a blending of that now. If you think of substance almost as, in our day and age, we might even be able to update that with either wave theory or, the fact that 96% of our universe is made up, 73 is dark energy, 23% is dark matter, and only 4% is observable matter that we interact with. You might even be able to make an argument for that too. Some people might. I don't know. It's just something to think about. Descartes and Newton held atomistic, dyslexic, or corpuscular theories of matter, but it was the English chemist John Dalton who revived the term atom and proposed that every elementary chemical is composed of identical atoms of a type unique to that element, and that what differentiates atoms is their weight. The ancient conception of atoms as an irreducible, indestructible basis of matter held firm until the atom was split in the 1940s, and quantum physics had recently demolished the notion that reality is fundamentally solid. So again, John Dalton would be coming in with the idea that every basic sort of thing that we have, again, the carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, even gold, silver, all these other things, they all have atoms that they're built of. But the unique thing to each thing would be how much the atoms weigh, so to speak. So atomic weight, that would then be talking about also then the amount of stuff in the atom, the protons, the neutrons, the electrons, how those balanced out. Each atom with a different number of all those things would be a different element as we would see them now. Atomistic political and social theories such as Hobbes and Mills view society as composed of autonomous individuals motivated primarily by competitive self-interest. So we, as people, are the atoms, so to speak. Mental atomism is the theory most influentially stated by John Locke that human consciousness is an aggregate of discrete experiences, simple perceptions that combine like atoms to produce complex thought. So our experience kind of creates us as that sort of atom sort of thing. John Locke, by the way, is something you're probably also someone else I'm definitely going to have to bring in to this. It was definitely um, influential with people like Thomas Jefferson and the formation of sort of the American Republic back in the day. He was one of the people that they ripped off. I mean, borrowed from Thomas Paine and the Iroquois Confederacy being other notable people they ripped off. Where was I? The theory of logical atomism, considered and later abandoned by both Wittgenstein and Russell, employs the same analogy, holding that sentences or propositions are molecular, that is, constructed from atomic facts or fundamental units of meaning. So this is basically the people just trying to kind of take that and put it into other things and um, adapting different ideas and adapting different sort of philosophies into sort of schools of thought that maybe they wouldn't be combined in otherwise. And sometimes that works. Sometimes that's, hey, this works pretty well. And there's a correlation between these things. Sometimes it's just like, oh, nope, let's throw that out and try something again. So that is animism and atomism. So again, a little bit of social studies, a little bit of sort of different sort of schools of thought in with that, bringing up some other names and a little bit of science, a little bit of stuff with that too. So after this, we will be moving on to words that begin with the letter B. I haven't figured out just yet how I'm going to start putting in some people. I've already passed through several people: Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, some of these other people might bring up just because there is some of them might come up in history or in government or some other things like that. Some of them might just be people to be familiar with that as well. So we will see as we go. Next up, the bees.